I'm deeply honored, gratified, indeed thrilled to be addressing this particular class, not only the 150th commencement at DePauw, and a class of which my brother is a member, but a class that I have had an unusual opportunity to see at firsthand, even though you may not have realized I was here. When you were freshmen, I was the Kilgore counselor for the DePauw newspaper, and I spent a lot of time wandering around the campus, looking at all of you, reminding myself what freshmen looked like. And believe me, it's pretty wet behind the ears. And walking around last night at the cocktail party given by Dr. Bottoms, I was amazed by the glorious transformation that has come over all of you in just 4 short years. I think I've done a lot, but you have in fact achieved greater gains. You are about to find out in the next few days what it means to call DePauw a small liberal arts college. You may have thought it seemed small while you were here, but no doubt you found the classes and the people to fill your time. As you go out into a much bigger world, you will find out that DePauw is tiny. Until we had the fortune to have a graduate elected to the Vice Presidency of the United States, hardly anyone out there had even heard of DePauw. And I guarantee that you will fall upon other DePauw graduates with relish and delight in a shared experience that only a very minuscule percentage of the world's population can identify with. So I would like to speak to you today in very intimate terms. You, to me, seem like not much larger than a family, not much larger than my circle of close and intimate friends, and it's in that spirit I want to talk to you today. I want to explore with you an aphorism attributed to the Spanish Saint Teresa of Avila. More tears have been shed over answered prayers than unanswered prayers. I must say right away that if all the statements attributed to Saint Teresa of Avila were actually said by her, she was a walking Bartlett's dictionary of quotations. But the historical accuracy here is not really the point. I think there are some profound truths and perhaps some cautionary notes in there that as one who feels in recent years I have had some prayers answered that I want to share with you. First of all, embedded in that statement is the assumption that one has prayers. That is something today that I'm afraid cannot be taken for granted. I think I've had no more chilling experience recently than having attended a cocktail party for some college graduates in New York City, graduates of Ivy League schools. It took place in a Park Avenue apartment. It was given by extremely wealthy parents, and these were young people who had literally had everything that money could buy all of their lives. What I encountered was boredom. They had Armani outfits, they had trips to Europe, they had cars, they had everything. I couldn't find out what they wanted, and they certainly did not seem to know. If you have not yet developed any prayers of your own, now is the time to start, and I hope some of my remarks can help. I have some reassuring words to those of you who have in fact had prayers that have already been dashed. There is no question in my own mind that failure is the foundation on which the greatest prayers are built, and that one can never fully savor the satisfactions of accomplishment unless one can contrast the feelings of hopes dashed or goals missed by way of contrast. In my own life, I remember vividly in high school applying to be an American Field Service exchange student. I was desperately anxious to go abroad, and eventually when I got to DePauw, I did get to go abroad. But there was no greater thing I wanted at this point in my life. And I also was frankly rather confident I was going to get it. There were only 6 applicants, and 2 were going to win. And I easily had better grade points, more extracurricular activities, all the things that you would look for, I thought, in a foreign exchange student. When the results were announced, the envelope came, and I confidently ripped it open to get a rejection letter. And I was crushed. I felt terrible. I didn't know I was going to bounce back. I did get abroad. And the combination of overconfidence and over-optimism and wanting something perhaps too much is an experience that I've never forgotten. Freud, in many of his great writings, mentioned that part of the process of becoming an adult is learning to embrace failure, to accept it, to bounce back, to grow from it, and to use that to develop new and perhaps even attainable goals. Once you've decided that, in fact, it's time to focus on some prayers, and I use that in the broadest sense to mean dreams, aspirations, goals, desires, how do you get them? I think the process begins by exploring yourself internally and not going immediately outward. I want to mention some qualities that you may not have thought about very much yet, but that I believe you all share or have had the opportunity to share simply by virtue of having been at DePauw University for the last 4 years. From my conversations with you, I don't believe many, if any of you, are in fact already jaded or sated by all of the things that life can in fact give you. That perhaps you have not had everything you have always wanted all of your lives, and indeed you have not had it while you were here in Greencastle. If you have, I'd like to know the secret. You have a capacity for optimism, and you have an innate capacity to hope for goals that have not yet been attained. You also have some qualities which I suspect you think of as old-fashioned, banal, or perhaps even take for granted. Visitors to the DePauw campus are often struck by how courteous students here are. In my experience with DePauw students and other DePauw graduates, I'm struck by qualities that in fact one cannot take for granted, ranging from qualities that are as profound as essential honesty, integrity, and trustworthiness, to perhaps the seemingly trivial ability to be on time. These are not to be taken for granted, and they are in fact growing ever scarcer, I believe, in the broader world at large. If you have spent 3 or 4 years in Greencastle, you also, I believe, have the ability to entertain yourself. There is a virtue to having been locked up in these dorms and fraternity and sorority houses all this time. I suspect you're very good conversationalists. You have a sense of humor. If not, you probably would have left here long before now. I'm not too worried that couch potato-dom is your fate. And I was struck as well last night, as I have been in alumni gatherings, by the surprising social poise, ability to carry on a conversation, and usually an intelligent conversation, that I find in DePauw graduates. Again, I suspect you have these things already. They are valuable. They will stand you in good stead. In fact, you are heading out into the world now with tremendous advantages over the vast percentage of other people your age living in this country. You are healthy, you are well-fed, you are educated. And I want to turn now to that old saw, the liberal arts education. Please take my word for it. Whatever you have heard about the values of a liberal arts education so far, you have not really yet had the opportunity to savor what that means. But I do want to point out to you that I believe today, standing here right now, we are embarking on what is the most exciting period in world politics and perhaps history that I have witnessed in my professional career as a journalist. I spent most of last week on the telephone with our correspondent in Beijing. There's a tremendous revolution underway there. Whether it happens this weekend or not, it is going to happen. There is a massive population now that has been given tastes of democracy. And as I'm sure many DePauw historians have introduced to you at some point, that is a very difficult tide to turn back. And I do not think it will in China. Perhaps even more profound are the changes going on in the Soviet Union. I'm not that much older than you, but to show how things have changed, let me remind you that when I was in the 5th grade, we underwent the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the students in my class were made to participate in nuclear bomb drills. Now, this was a drill intended to protect us in the event that there was a direct nuclear strike on my hometown of Quincy, Illinois. This drill consisted of sitting along the only brick wall in what was an otherwise all-glass school. And I remember even 5th graders were wondering what these glass panes were going to do to protect us in the event of a bomb dropping. When I went to bed and was encouraged to say my prayers through elementary school, even into junior high, the only prayer I really remember saying was, "Please God, don't let the Russians bomb us." We lived from day to day thinking that that was a viable threat. How dramatically things have changed today. And I want to say that this process is going to tax you as educated citizens with all of the analytical skills to which you've been introduced here at DePauw. I do not think this is going to necessarily be an easier world in which to live. Again, The studies of nationalism persistently show that identities of nations are often forged through the presence of an enemy. And in the United States, during all of my lifetime, our national identity has largely been defined by the presence of a Soviet enemy. If you take this enemy away, I can predict, I think with some confidence, there is going to be a scramble to find another enemy. Will it be the Japanese? That question will be decided by you and your generation. Will we turn internally for enemies? Or will we, perhaps idealistically, actually take human nature to a higher plane where our own identities do not in fact depend on the presence of an enemy? These, I think, will have, the answers to these questions will have the profoundest implications from the world in which you are going to live. There will be no easy answers. To just cite one example of the way I believe everyday citizens must call upon all the resources of analysis that they can muster, I remind you of the recent death threat from Iran against the author Salman Rushdie. Many bookstore owners in America rushed to respond to that death threat by pulling that book off the shelves. Did they ever stop to think that on a bookstore level, they were in fact doing precisely what governments do when they pay off, when they provide ransom for the takers of hostages? That to in fact respond to terrorism by giving the terrorists what they want is the one sure way to encourage its repetition. And yet this analysis was not made by many of America's bookstore owners. These kinds of questions will be presented to you. I guarantee that you will encounter intolerance, bigotry, racism, closed-mindedness, provincialism on an almost daily basis throughout your life, and you will have to summon great powers of analysis and courage to combat that. You will also now, if you have not already begun, must undertake the same kind of personal analysis that you have now been taught to bring to the rest of the world. If you think this is going to be an easy task, you are absolutely wrong. Our capacity for self-delusion is tremendous. It took me years to begin to face up to what really were some profound weaknesses. And here let me say, for example, some thoughts I have on the nature of genius versus hard work. My voyage of self-discovery started by thinking to myself, is there some field of endeavor in which I'm in fact a genius? I ought to find that out. That's the easy way to success. And how do you find out if you're a genius unless you try things? So certainly by high school, I was trying practically everything. My parents had to spend a fortune in lessons, from basketball to swimming to music to piano. I was still doing it here at DePauw, surprising friends of mine by signing up for a painting class when I had shown absolutely no interest in art up to that point, and also taking piano lessons during a winter term. I kept waiting for that bolt of lightning to come down from the sky and say, yes, you have found it, you are a genius in this field. Well, guess what didn't happen? As a matter of fact, I even tried writing. I took a creative writing class here, and I got a B-, including many comments that perhaps this was not the right future for me. Hard work is, it's a cliche, but it is a tremendous amount of what one achieves. Let me even say that the seemingly most God-given quality that we have, the seemingly most genetic factor, are looks, which I know is always a subject of concern to young people. One of the comforts of aging, frankly, is that more and more you realize good looks are a function of acquired taste, exercise, fitness, and diet. So even if, in fact, you feel hopelessly overlooked in the great scheme of things by the genetic makeup of your appearance, you can be amazed what happens in 10 or 12 years. When I set out to write my first book, I was given a very small advance. It sounded big, it turned out to be very small, $20,000. Book advances are paid out in stages. In this case, I got half the money when I started writing the book, and I got half when I finished it. And at the time, I was thinking to myself, oh, isn't this wonderful? I'll finish the book, and this $10,000 will drop on me. What will I do with it? Buy my mother a fur coat, or something like that. The fact of the matter was that about halfway through this experience, I had to give up my regular job in order to pursue this. I realized that the first $10,000 was just about out, and I was running into the red. I remember vividly that I was jogging in Central Park at the time, contemplating the state of affairs, and I did think to myself, whatever the chances are for this book commercially, and frankly at the time a serious book about lawyers didn't seem like it was going to hit the bestseller list, I said this had better be good so someone starts paying it for it. And indeed, when I finished the book and did finally get the $10,000, I walked straight to Chemical Bank and gave it all to them to pay off my MasterCard charge. That was the glamour of the lump sum payment. But there was tremendous motivation in having to support myself, and hard work did pay off, even in a field that I had decided long ago genius would not strike. It's important, I think, at some point as well, to recognize one's weaknesses. This could take years. I think in my own case, it was only after I had graduated from law school and I was sitting on a balcony of the Watergate Hotel, the notorious Watergate Hotel, with a very close friend of mine, that I was able to sit down with a friend of mine and say, look, we know what wonderful people we are. Let's look at the weak spots. For example, I recognized at this point that I lacked a certain attention to detail. Some of this can be corrected. I recognize that I have a relatively short attention span, that I liked action, I liked change. I also recognized that I was not an inspired mathematician, that I made sloppy mistakes. And it was time to do something. I was a lawyer at the time. It was time to choose something where these would not prove fatal. I think as well, when you're contemplating what kinds of goals and objectives to set, it's also worth thinking a little bit about the country we live in and what it rewards. To a degree that I would never have expected, having grown up in a small town in the Midwest, America has achieved a startling level of meritocracy. It may not exist in many places, and indeed there are places where it's anything but a meritocracy. But there are corners of this country where you can be anyone you want. And if you provide a service, if you excel, if you produce a product that people you want, you will succeed phenomenally. It is a huge, vast, and even forgiving country. Winning the Pulitzer Prize, I had written some articles about insider traders and white-collar criminals. And I can tell you that I have met white-collar criminals who have gone on to phenomenally successful careers in America. Times that is frightening, at other times it is tremendously optimistic. Once you have decided that you have gone through this kind of process and are beginning to shape these goals and dreams, what should they be? I want to share with you here a decision that I made to leave a large law firm where I was working to take up writing full time. If you are all at the moment uncertain of what you want to do in life, I want you to know that I was sitting in exactly your seat, even though the future looked very secure. I was leaving DePauw to go to Harvard Law School and an almost certain job opportunity after that. And indeed, I had left Harvard and gone to a very high-paying law job. I remember very well, 2.5 years after getting there, flying home to Quincy and meeting my parents at the airport. And imagine what they thought after having spent all this money to put me through DePauw, having spent a tremendous amount of money to put me through Harvard Law School while I had a sister at DePauw, having finally gotten me off the family dole in a high-paying law firm job, and I said, I'm quitting to become a writer. May I please, this comment let me address to the parents. They were wonderfully supportive, something for which I will always be grateful. That if you think your children are leaving you now and will not need this kind of support later, you're wrong. This is the most fragile point, I think, in young people's lives. And it's the point where they are probably going to do something that shocks you, even when you thought you had lost all the capacity to be shocked, surprised, or disappointed. So hang in with them. This is perhaps the single greatest insight I think I've had in my twisting and turning career. I was working at a law firm in a very competitive environment. At the time, about 25 new lawyers were hired every year, and only 1 or 2 of those after 7 or 8 years would be promoted to partnership, a little bit like getting tenure in a college or university, but with a much higher salary. I looked around while I was there to see who out of the classes ahead of me were in fact mounting to this holy grail. And I was very taken aback to see that it was not necessarily the people with the most glittering resumes. There were many good resumes there, and there were many outstanding resumes, and they weren't necessarily the ones making it to the top. I'm not sure it was necessarily even the ones who were the smartest. And I'm certainly sure it was not the ones who were grinding away, putting in the longest hours. Many of them were doing that in a desperate effort to guarantee their admission to the partnership. As best I could tell, it didn't work. What was the one quality that I saw distinguish those people who did accede to the partnership? They loved what they were doing. It didn't seem like work to them. They weren't counting hours because they were too busy enjoying the activity they were engaged in. And as much as I indeed did find it stimulating from time to time, and as much as in fact I appreciated getting a paycheck every other week, it was not going to be enough. I found myself increasingly feigning the same kind of enthusiasm and love for my work that I saw some other people had naturally, and I realized I could not do that for long. I must admit I was a little bit envious. How fortunate that some people would love doing something that pays huge amounts of money. It didn't seem fair. I thought back to myself, it is time to figure out what do you love doing, because people who love what they do tend to succeed. And anyone can make a living, even if it's a competitive field, if in fact the enthusiasm and the drive is there. And I did, in part of that, think back to my career as editor of the DePauw. For me, that had always been an extracurricular activity, but it was the closest job or job-like situation I had ever occupied that I felt I had felt some of the same deep-seated enthusiasm that I saw the lawyers around me who were getting to the top displaying in the law firm. And that was what underlay my decision to throw all that over and take a very abrupt turn in my own career. Embarking on a book, which seemed at the time like an extremely risky and wild-eyed thing to do, in fact, proved to be relatively easy. By this time, one of my goals was very much not only to write, but to write something that would last, something that would be in libraries, that would still be around long after I had left. And here I was first tempted by what I would say is a panoply of the wrong sorts of goals to set and pursue. I cite among these almost all the accoutrements of success: celebrity, status, acclaim, power, even money. After I had written a few articles for the American Lawyer magazine, I did get a call from an agent. He was someone right out of a Hollywood movie: gold chains, white shoes, a tan year-round. And the first thing he said, "I can make you a star. You are going to be rich. I have just put a client on the bestseller list." And I have to admit my head was spinning and whirling around. I said, "Well, how do you intend to do this?" He said, "We want you to write an expose of your life in a large law firm." And I said, "Well, that sounds a little like not quite what I had in mind." He said, "Well, that's all right. We'll just factionalize it. You know, dress it up with some false names, put in lots of sex. It will be a sizzling bestseller." He wasn't quite that crude, but I'm sorry to say that my head was turned, and we then went for a meeting with the publisher, and I sat down with an editor. Now, I thought by getting to a major New York publisher, I was mounting the high point of the literary world, and the editor, who I thought, of course, would be this wonderful literary figure and craftsman, immediately said, "Just keep one thing in mind. I don't want more than 3 characters. The average American can't follow more than 3 characters in a story." So when I considered that and all the sex and everything else that I was being exhorted to put into the book, I was beginning to wonder why I had to write the book. Why didn't they write this book? When I discovered that I was going to be marketed on talk shows. Whatever the book actually said, I was going to be the person who could be paraded around, be on the Oprah show, the Today Show, whatnot, and talk about my life in a large law firm. And what was really going on when I met editors and agents was their assessment of how I would look on TV. It took a while to figure this out. I was on the day of about to sign for the advance, which actually was much larger than the $20,000 I eventually got, when, thank God, something took hold of me and said, "This is not what you want to do." And shortly after that, I met the editor with whom I've worked ever since, Alice Mayhew at Simon & Schuster, who did give me some advice I consider among the best I've ever received. And that was, remember, never write a book, never pursue something on the expectation that it will bring you fame, celebrity, wealth, and a position on the bestseller list. Because what if it doesn't? The odds against that are very high. If you have written something that you didn't write because you wanted to create that project, you will be left the rest of your life with this piece of trash sitting on not only your coffee table, but some others, And you will be identified with that, and you will have none of the allegedly compensating riches. I thought that was excellent advice. And indeed, I have since seen others pursue these goals, and in many cases succeed. It isn't unusual to feel a bit envious when, against what seems all justice, people do achieve high levels of the accoutrements of success without seemingly have delivered anything of any great worth. And yet, as the years passed, I find more and more that if these people end up punishing themselves, in the end, you will know whether you have earned or have deserved whatever it is that accompanies your achievements. And you will know whether it is just. Once you have settled on goals that reflect your gifts, your interests, what it is that you love in life, I want to caution you, you should never stop. There are a multitude of goals that you can set. There are a multitude of dreams that you can have. And again, as I move through the world, I am struck by how many people have achieved wonderful things in a multitude of fields: the arts, business, science, innovation, athletics, cooking, child rearing. We had a wonderful story on the front page of the Wall Street Journal about a man who did succeed in raising the world's largest hog. Now, I'm not saying you should go out and raise hogs, but there was something wonderfully heartwarming and endearing about someone who loved what he was doing and cared that much about this animal. What if, finally, whatever prayers you have set are indeed answered? I had that experience last year in winning the Pulitzer Prize. For a journalist, the Pulitzer Prize is almost overwhelming. I can't say that it was something I dreamt about because it seemed too elusive. I suppose it's the equivalent of dreaming as a senior that you'll be named a Rhodes Scholar. It is not a realistic thing to be fantasizing about on a day-to-day basis. Nevertheless, having written what I thought was the best work I had ever done in the previous year, I did have tiny hopes. And someone, I am an investigative reporter after all, I did manage to find out a month before the Pulitzers were announced that I was in fact one of 3 finalists in the competition. With benefit of hindsight, I would just as soon not have known that. It was not an easy month to go through. I've just lectured you on how wonderful it is to fail and how you can build from that. Let me tell you, the prospect of being second place was excruciating. I didn't even tell my parents. I didn't want them to have to live through the same torture. Well, the day of the prize announcement came around, I had heard nothing. In every other year, I had always known by about 10 o'clock in the morning who the winners were. After all, I have a lot of friends who are reporters. I pride myself on my investigative skills. 10 o'clock, no phone calls. 11 o'clock, no word. I was beginning to tap my pencil on the desk. At noon, I absolutely threw up my hands. I went with a colleague of mine, also nominated for the prize, and we decided we can't stand it. I mean, how humiliating if we don't get it. I can't believe no one has given us any advance warning so we can prepare for this. We vanished into a restaurant. I didn't come back to the office till minutes before the prize was announced. We should have known by then that this conspiracy of silence could only mean one thing, that indeed someone would have had the good grace to put us out of our misery if we were the losers. We did find out minutes later that we had won. And I can tell you the experience of that is a little like going over a cliff in a barrel. It happens so quickly, it is so overwhelming, the reactions are so sudden, and you know in some vague way that your life is never going to be the same again, but you don't know how, and you're simultaneously trying to embrace everything that's happening while you cling to what you think was the best parts of whatever you were before this happened. One surprising thing did happen that was absolutely glorious. I was, of course, happy that I had won the prize. But I immediately saw reflected in the eyes, the faces of the people around me, in my family, colleagues, people from the past who came out of God knows where to reach me, this wonderful joy in all of those who had helped so much and had been encouraged along the way, a genuine joy and delight in the success of another. And that was the most overwhelmingly positive aspect of the experience for me, and one that I could never have foreseen. Indeed, I was overwhelmed by the reflections of joy that came from DePauw, which reminded me once again that this is a university that will be part of your life forever, that will be watching you and does care and will take joy in whatever successes you manage to achieve. And I can tell you that with the Pulitzer Prize has in fact come some of those accoutrements of success that I'm cautioning you should never seek for their own sake. And when they do come, they can be richly satisfying. Not all of them, of course. Some of them are simply annoying. But last week, or 2 weeks ago, for example, I was a guest at a White House dinner. I was chatting with the President and Mrs. Bush, and I was seated next to Supreme Court Justice Brennan, a man whose opinions I had read and studied assiduously in law school. And I did have one of these strange kind of out-of-body experiences where I thought for a moment I was sitting in a movie theater, and here on the screen all of these people were walking back and forth, and there I was at the table. And I did have to pinch myself. Perhaps I'm still enough of a small-town boy that I could hardly believe that I was being acceded the opportunity to sit in such company. And indeed, I feel a little bit like that today. I wouldn't be here had I not gone out, done something I loved, which really, in and of itself, probably would have been enough, achieved some measure of recognition, and indeed, I hope, in doing so, reflected well on this community, on family, and the many teachers and other people who made this possible. I have only one exhortation for you today, and that is to go out into this huge, crazy, wonderful world and let your imaginations go. If you haven't before, start having dreams. Have lots of them. Have great dreams, have small dreams. I think I can tell you with a near certainty that some of those dreams, not all of them, but some of those dreams will come true. And if there are tears, they will be tears of joy. Thank you.